How many of you have sat down to watch a movie and thought, this movie is just not for me anymore? Hey guys, welcome back to Nerd Crave. Today we're going to talk about fandoms. We're going to talk about old versus new and try to decide whether the new stuff that's coming out, whether it be Star Trek or Star Wars, is really bad or if it's just your perception, your nostalgia, your emotional connection to the old stuff that makes you think it's better. Is it truly better or is it not? Let's find out. Don't forget to like this video, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already because I will be putting up at least 1 to 2 videos a week, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified every time I put up a new video. With that, let's get started. Fandoms have never been more toxic than they are today. Even 10 years ago, being a fan of something and being a part of a community for that thing was generally a positive experience. Today, fandoms are being torn apart at an alarming rate. I'm not here to talk about all the recent politics regarding social justice issues, cultural appropriation, things like that, although they do play a very significant role in all the infighting. I'm more concerned with the actual content and quality. Are older things inherently better than the newer versions, or are we as fans looking through a lens of nostalgia? Countless fandoms suffer from this. Take the Stargate franchise, for example. The Stargate franchise started out as a motion picture in 1994. It was not hugely successful, although I think it was a pretty great movie. But it gathered enough attention to be considered for a TV show, and Stargate SG-1 eventually aired in 1997. While the show never achieved the popularity of Star Trek, it still spawned one of the biggest TV franchises in history. Fans of the original show were hesitant to accept the new version, Stargate Atlantis, but it continued to see modest success with not very much controversy. However, the third series, Stargate Universe, was panned by critics and fans alike for being a major departure from the tone of the first two series. Universe was clearly influenced by the then-recent Battlestar Galactica reboot, and as such had a darker tone, more mature themes, and almost none of the humor and wit that the show had become known for. Fans hated it, and it failed in less than 2 seasons, and you know what? It's a crying shame. When viewed on its own merits, Stargate Universe was incredible. Truly a fantastic, groundbreaking show with incredible casting, fantastic acting, and a cast that clearly had tons of chemistry and some really interesting storytelling. I tend to have the ability to separate myself from what I'm a fan of and look at it with an objective eye. I don't bring much of a bias into any new series. Do I have expectations? Yeah, for sure. But I'm willing to let a new movie, a sequel, or a new series stand on its own and not live under the shadow of what has come before. Of course, we couldn't have a discussion about fandoms without discussing Star Trek and Star Wars, 2 incredibly polarizing franchises with decades of history behind them. Star Trek started in the 60s to mixed success at the time, but the performances of the original crew and the imagination of Gene Roddenberry have made the show such a classic that you can't really argue with the old guys who say it's Kirk or nothing. Except you can. Since then, we have seen well over a dozen movies and almost 30 seasons of TV shows based on the original premise. I grew up with the Next Gen crew, and I can remember my father and his friends discussing it and saying, this next generation crap is garbage. Bring back the old crew. Even 30 years ago, grumpy old men were still debating about fandoms and trying to convince people that older equals better. But is that true? Surely sometimes it is, but certainly not always. For me, the later years of the Next Gen timeline, basically from the 3rd season of TNG to the end of Voyager, are the golden years for Star Trek, with the bulk of Deep Space Nine, particularly from where Worf joins the show, being my favorite to watch. However, since CBS has launched the new era of Trek with Star Trek Discovery, the collective fan base has pretty much had an aneurysm. People are violently angry about the changes to canon and the various mood and tone changes presented in the new shows. Personally, while I agree that many of the changes were jarring after 20 plus seasons in the Next Generation timeline, I can allow for two things: artistic expression and the tendency to tell stories based on the world we live in. The showrunners wanted to put their own spin on a time-worn classic, and they wanted to make it feel more relevant to today's audiences. You couldn't emulate the style of technology displayed on the ships of the old series. We have better technology in our pockets than many of the computers on older versions of the Enterprise. So the look and feel of the show has to match our current expectation of what the future will look like. As far as changing the Klingons so drastically, that seemed jarring and unnecessary, but overall I could forgive it. The darker and more combative tone of the show is in keeping with the current landscape of TV. Shows like Game of Thrones, Altered Carbon, and The Expanse demonstrate that we want our TV to be grittier and darker in general, and not shy away from violence and mature themes. Is it the show I always wanted? No. But am I pretty satisfied with it 2 seasons in? Yeah. So how about my thoughts on Star Wars? The recent wave of Disney-led Star Wars films have illustrated the divide between old fans and new almost more than any other example. The world has been split almost exactly 50-50 since the first movie, The Force Awakens. Star Wars fans have always been some of the most combative, comparing their cult to other fan bases and judging themselves superior. But when the old guard got hold of these new movies, they turned on their own kind and began to destroy the entire fandom from the inside out. Critics of the new movie said it was just a reskin of A New Hope, with tons of social justice virtue signaling peppered throughout. They called the heroine, Rey, a Mary Sue because she did not have to earn her powers the way Luke Skywalker did. And they are not entirely wrong on either point. However, fans need to learn to let a film or series stand on its own merits. The new trilogy, viewed as something apart from the originals, are an excellent, well-crafted series of science fiction movies with interesting characters and socially relevant storytelling. Is it true that filmmakers across all genres are cutting and pasting socially celebrated characters into new and old franchises alike? Yes! How many times have we seen a traditionally straight white male character be redefined as either a person of color, a woman, or a non-binary character? It happens all too often lately, and it is a problem. But you cannot allow the pressures of the society we live in to taint what is otherwise a fantastic viewing experience. It sucks that we have to feel like we are being preached at about issues like racism, homophobia, and gender bias in our entertainment media. But on the flip side, huge numbers of new fans who now feel included in the genre are flocking to these fandoms and breathing new life and new perspectives into the community. The old guard needs to realize that if a fandom is going to survive the transition to a new generation of viewers, the new content needs to be relevant to the struggles and issues of the current world we live in. You see this change across all major fan bases, whether you're looking at a female Doctor Who, or a reimagined Ghostbusters, a gritty, violent Daniel Craig 007, or as I mentioned before, the award-winning Battlestar Galactica remake, which, while being critically acclaimed, was a huge departure from the optimistic family tone of the original 1978 series. Something can be said for the actual quality of some older stuff. There is no question that many things from the 80s and 90s have not been successfully remade. Looking at movies for the moment, the period of time between 1977 and 1989, roughly, was a golden age of movies. So many of the movies from back then still stand out as some of the best movies of all time. Stuff like The Empire Strikes Back, Terminator, Alien, Aliens, Terminator 2, the Indiana Jones series, Back to the Future franchise, Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so many more. These movies stand the test of time, and it is literally almost impossible to make a newer version of these movies that can compare. We've seen movies like RoboCop and Total Recall be remade with little success, and yet, for the younger generation of kids who may not have seen the originals, these movies are not bad. They're just different, and not necessarily up to the level of these 9 out of 10 classics. My younger kids love the new Star Wars movies and are obsessed with BB-8 in the same way we were obsessed with R2-D2 back in the 80s. Sometimes you have to let things exist on their own, stand on their own, without trying to rank them or compare them to things that you are emotionally attached to. For every person who hates the new, there are 2 people that cannot relate to the old and feel left out of the conversation. In this day and age, with the absolute glut of content available to us, we have to realize that not everything is made for you. So if you're anything like me, you have definitely experienced moments in the last 10 years or so of movies and TV where you feel like you have been left behind as a fan. You feel like they are no longer catering to you, the original fan, and you feel insulted. You feel like you stuck with this for maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years, and then they just completely changed things. They made it for a completely different audience, and you feel personally insulted. And part of the reason why there is so much hate and so much angst in these fandom communities is because people are taking it personally. You need to understand that these shows are works of art and they're meant to appeal to the broadest possible masses. They need to make money, and they need to be relevant to the current issues today in order to make money, in order to be successful in a very competitive market. With so many options available to us, Netflix, Amazon Prime, traditional TV, pirate downloads, DVDs and Blu-rays, there are so many ways to consume content, and there are more TV shows than ever before available to us. These shows have to be more competitive. They have to reach a larger audience. They can't just reach out to the 40 and 50-year-old white guys that they used to. They have to broaden their horizons, and they have to include more people. They have to be more inclusive. So try to take that into account when you're judging something, that this has not been made just for you. It has been made to appeal to all kinds of people, whether they're black or white or male or female or gay or straight. Whatever it is, these shows need to appeal to a wider population base so that they can achieve the success necessary just to stay on the air. We see all too often that shows that we are really excited about get canceled after 1 or 2 seasons these days. Even on Netflix, where they're making their own content and distributing it, you would think the costs would be lower and it would be a little easier for them. They're constantly canceling shows after 1 or 2 seasons if they don't get the kind of views that they want in the first season. So you've got to give things a chance to mature, and you've got to be willing to grow with your fandom. You just need to be willing to grow with your franchise. You need to be more open and accepting to the fact that not every story has to be about you or something that you relate to. There are many other people in this world with very diverse backgrounds, and we need to be able to tell stories and share stories that are relevant to everyone if we are going to keep these franchises alive and moving into the next generation of viewers. Thanks, guys. Stay classy.